Hello friends, welcome back to the James Lawrence Allcott channel. I'm so excited to show you this video because we're going to be talking about Liverpool, but at a deeper level. We're going to have a look at the psychology of it. And I want to dive into that a lot more this season, the sports psychology element of football, because it's so important. And with Liverpool, I think they've got such an interesting summer and challenges ahead after last season. Of course, they were brilliant and are a brilliant team, but last season they had to deal with failure. So how do they draw a line under that failure, and how do they motivate themselves moving forward? That's what we're going to look at in this video. I was fortunate enough to have some time with Dan Abrahams, who's he's a writer, but more importantly, a sports psychologist who's worked with the England rugby team. He's worked with numerous Premier League players and does so to this day. He's written books, Soccer Tough, Golf Tough, amazing person to be talking to about a Liverpool team and a Liverpool squad and a Liverpool manager who needs to deal with last season, draw a line under it, and look to topple a challenger in Manchester City that looks like it's gone to a new level. But can Liverpool reach those same levels? There's also the problems with an aging squad to a point. You've got players who are kind of running down their contract a little bit. And is it the last chance for this squad? And is that something that they should utilize as motivation for them? And just generally, how do they deal with their mental state going into this new season? This all kind of came about because I watched a documentary and it involved Sir Alex Ferguson. And I wondered if, for someone who had, of course, won loads of titles, but more importantly, had lost a few along the way and had to bounce back, was there elements of his style that Klopp could use this time around with Liverpool? The thing that got me interested about this with Liverpool was actually watching a documentary about Sir Alex Ferguson, a recent one that came out on Amazon Prime. And what was so interesting, that as someone who kind of as a child grew up watching him and understanding that he was very fiery, but he was just a kind of non-stop winner, they were talking about his time at Aberdeen. And during his time at Aberdeen, his focus, and this is what they kind of conclude at the end of it, wasn't being the best team in Scotland. It was being better than Rangers and Celtic, and in particular, being better than Rangers, because Fergie had a tough time when he was a fan of Rangers, then played for them, and in the season that he played for them, it didn't go very well, and he kind of got hounded out, and that kind of fuel or sort of anger, I guess, drove him to a level that kind of hadn't been seen in terms of, Aberdeen and a team like that being able to dominate over the old firm. And I think that's just something that he quite possibly always kind of had with him during his career. And of course, he then went to Man United, had those difficult times, but I'm sure still had that fire in his belly. Now, with Liverpool and Jurgen Klopp, who we have no doubts is a glorious manager, he has to deal with the failure and the frustration of last season. And with a group of players that I think everyone felt went to a new level when they were able to win both the Champions League and the Premier League. So the first question, I guess, is that idea and that process of what Fergie utilised as fuel, his failure at Rangers. What is that? Is that something that can be utilised again and again? Or what are the sort of general thoughts around using failure as fuel?
If the human brain works in one of two directions, that's towards or away from, approach or avoid. What we pretty much know is the strongest motivator is to avoid, is away from, more so than towards. And so everything you said there, and I'm not an expert in the history of Sir Alex Ferguson, but what you said, I have some idea about. I can guess that that away from, that avoidant drive mechanism that he used was really, really powerful for him. And what we know from research is that's the most powerful mechanism for human beings. The big question for sports psychologists and for coaches is that the healthiest mechanism? These days, if I may say so, and it almost feels like a cliche to say it now, this generation are less tolerant of that. I just wonder if there needs to be a more adaptive way. I've seen firsthand Jurgen Klopp's behaviour, and he's still quite an intimidating character. He might not be the same as Sir Alex Ferguson, but I mean, I worked with Derby County several years ago, and Derby County played them in the Carabao Cup third round. Jurgen Klopp stood on the halfway line, this big sort of 6'3" imposing figure, watching the Derby players warm up. He's now become quite infamous for that within the industry. That's what he does. But back then, that was little known. And all the players afterwards sort of said to me, well, Dan, you're the sports psychologist. Why was he doing that? What was he doing? Why was he looking at us? And I was like, well, he's done a good job when you're there, hasn't he? He's clearly intimidated you. That's what it's designed probably to do. Or just to have a look over and get a feel for, the warm up and how his opposition are warming up. So I'm saying that because don't get me wrong. He's quite a character. That's an
interesting thing that I think maybe I've glossed over is understanding, I guess, your power and gravitas and utilizing it, right? That's something that he really needs to do, because I think surely there will be an element where, we were able to reach the top of the mountain and then kind of normal order was resumed a little bit. But now to go again and reach those heights, like how does he wash away all those frustrations from last season, or that element possibly of doubt?
He can absolutely look at the opposition and he can absolutely utilize them with his players to say, this is who we have to beat and this is how we have to go about it. Equally, he can completely ignore the opposition. He can ignore last season, and he can focus on the strengths in his squad. He can, with his coaching staff, who are very good, for highly competent coaching staff, lay down the processes that will enable them to optimize what they do have. And I would imagine that I had a guess that he will be focused on that. He will be focused on them.
If you're still watching the video at this point and you're enjoying it so far, please do consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. This is something that I'd love to know if you guys enjoy, because if you let me know that through hitting the like button and let me know in the comments, then this is something we could dive into throughout the season. Dan's been brilliant with his time and is offering up a little bit more, so we can have more of these kind of conversations. I also spoke with Jake Hopkinson from Perception Psychology. Link to him is down in the description as well. And he gave me some really interesting articles and bits and pieces for me to use as well. One in particular was about failure. And we're talking about how Fergie's style from the 80s is something that probably doesn't work now because the players don't want to see that. But turning failure into fuel for success. And this is something that you guys, of course, can utilize as well. That's what I kind of want from these videos, to kind of showcase that sport is kind of like the sort of the game of life itself. And there's some elements here that the Liverpool players will understandably utilize, but you guys can as well. So with this article from Psychology Today, it was saying turning failure into fuel for success. Latest research shows that the sting of failure is needed to turn things around. And the most exciting, I guess, thing, and something that I didn't expect it to be the case, was the fact that there was, in this article, it talks about a study that they did where they got a load of people and got them to putt, and they weren't able to see where their putt was going. So in this study, the person was being told if they were getting close to the hole or if it was going well or not. And then there was a load of people that were told that, oh, this is going great, you're doing brilliantly, keep going. So positive feedback and negative feedback, success and failure. And the results of the study revealed that failure, as you would expect, had a negative impact on people's emotional state and self-esteem, sure. But it also found that participants' performance on subsequent physical and cognitive tasks were not impaired by failure. So overall, the findings lend support to the more optimistic view that failure is a necessary condition for future success. So what I'm getting at here is that Liverpool failed, but that doesn't mean they're not a great team and can't be a great team again. And actually, again, this article talks about it a little bit, this idea of cybernetic control theory. And essentially what that means is that you need feedback. You need to fail. It's necessary for you to have that, to have a loop of information that can refine you as a team. And tactically, they are already doing that with the signing of Konate. Last season, there were 8 different centre-back pairings, and with Kabak and Nat Phillips. Now, Nat Phillips did very well. Kabak had some good moments as well. But what Jurgen Klopp did last season was he stuck with the tactics and just dealt with the personnel that he could get to play in those centre-back positions and try and do their best. Because the way that Liverpool play at their best is with a high line, and they stuck with that. As you can see from this graphic from Mark R Stats, it shows that their high line is so much higher than anyone else because that's how they press. With Konate, you've got a player who is a Virgil van Dijk in training. You know, he's big, physical, great feet, but also can use his excellent pace to deal with the space in behind him. His aerial duel success rate last season was 76%, as opposed to someone like Kabak, which was only 59%. So in terms of recruitment in those centre-back positions to allow them to play and to learn from last year's failings, they're doing that. I don't doubt the confidence of this first team squad. But with Man City raising the bar again and last season's dip from Liverpool, I wondered how they would motivate themselves. And as elite leaders who have that confidence in themselves, would the use of the likes of anger, frustration, revenge be useful in the motivation to create the drive to get Liverpool back to the top?
Emotions like frustration, anger, despondency, doubt, worry, anxiety. These are the kind of emotions that need to be managed. Head coaches, managers need to manage the emotional temperature of the organization for 9 months. Because if you don't, and I think a lot don't do this very well or well enough, if you don't, it becomes a very, very much a roller coaster ride and you become a slave to your emotions. Teams tend to be very up or very down, very anxious or very stable. And I think the problem is if a team like Liverpool go, well, last season was awful and we can't do that again. And we've got to challenge City. And what are City doing? It's not a very stable narrative. I think when you wonder too much onto what everybody else is doing, how good everybody else is, then that more often than not every time, but more often than not, limits you rather than empowers you.
Like you say, you talk about emotional temperature there. That's fascinating. And stability. So my idea, or that's what when it hit me in the face of like, wow, anger has driven Fergie to this, to the top of the mountain in this much smaller situation. I know because you can be switched on. I remember as a player myself, when I was a player, I had a manager who every so often, and I didn't realise till down the road, he'd just go after me before a game. And the anger was incredible fuel for me in that one game. But I imagine what you're saying is that although that, Roberto Martinez says that emotion isn't rational. Even if in that moment it might be that turbocharge to kind of get you, excited, concentrating on achieving as instead of failing.
Yes.
It's still not a long-term approach that you would be wary of utilizing frustration and previous events too much because it can lead to that instability or that overheating of that emotional temperature. Am I right in saying that, do you think?
Yeah, look, I mean, but anger can be an emotion. It can be utilized for what we would call, sorry to give you some psychological jargon, approach behavior. So your experience of your manager, instilling some form of sort of anger in you, what you're experiencing is energy. It's then how you utilize that energy. Now, in football, you can't run around like a headless chicken. People, you listen to phone-ins and people going bananas about players not having passion. The problem with that narrative is that players can't run around like headless chickens. They have, football has structure. It has principles of play. Players have to be disciplined within their role. They have responsibilities. Now, anger can be utilized. Anger releases testosterone, adrenaline. But we also need to be focused. We need to be able to be focused on the cues, the clues, the triggers that are emerging and dissolving around us. So yes, anger can fuel things. Anger can be a great driver, a great motivator. Revenge can be, aggressiveness can be. And there are examples of sport. Sport litters us with examples of, say, Michael Jordan. We all saw the Last Dance documentary. Actually, he used instrumental aggressiveness on the court to be able to bolster his athleticism. So the wonderful thing about competing, the wonderful thing about sports psychology is there's no absolute answer in many respects. It's always, it depends.
Yeah.
Every player is different. Every team is different. Now when I was at Derby County, I had the pleasure of working alongside Steve McLaren, and he would always, I'm sure he won't mind me saying, he would always, when he spoke a lot about his days at Manchester United, he would always fix me with a sort of a very serious look when we spoke about it. And he would just look at me and go, that dressing room, Dan, wow. It was with Roy Keane and Gary Neville and David, just like dangerous dressing room, brutal, well, absolutely brutal.
That's such a great point, Dan, because I think when you look at that Liverpool dressing room, I think that's why I keep coming back to this as a tool, because when you talk about the word energy, that's something Klopp has always instilled in his players. But it's never overloaded them. It's always inspired them as a group. So the likes of, Van Dijk and Fabinho and Jordan Henderson, I think about a lot. Although that, I think it would be fuel more so than if you were, a team almost like Man City. That same kind of energy probably wouldn't work. Also with style of play, which kind of comes back to what you're saying, which was there are lots of right answers, because it's about the kind of the style of play of the team as well. Liverpool, if they are going to gegenpress and get at the opposition, that kind of aggressive nature is something that's useful in their minds, as long as it sharpens the mind instead of overloads the mind. I'm guessing, because I think that's the fun thing with this squad, is that they are that little bit older, and so maybe they need that. I guess it's interesting, when a team is on its way up. That I'd imagine that energy of achieving something that you haven't done before is so great. But what must happen is it must taper off once you've completed it.
Really, in many respects, you've got to negotiate with your team. You've got to co-create solutions. And in many respects, that's just my belief, and Jurgen Klopp might go about this in a completely different way. But you can't really do it without sitting down and talking with, let's say, Virgil van Dijk. You can't do it without understanding, how Trent Alexander-Arnold gets into his optimal mental state. And that's where the complexity lies. So you can't necessarily just have a broad brush approach of going, well, we're going to hate Manchester City. We're going to be really angry about last season, and that's going to drive us. There's this enormous assumption in high performance sport that people get motivated by winning. Some players don't. Some players, motivation is, again, I'm going to use this word complex. Lots of players get motivated by the experience of moving, of running, of just playing football, of enjoying the experience of playing. They get motivated by competing with their teammates. There's a lot of motivators, and actually you can help players high perform more consistently under pressure by actually helping them find the more intrinsic internal motivators, rather than the gotta win, which actually can get in the way of performance.
I wonder if as much as you need that individualization, you also need a collective theme, maybe to kind of to bring a very large group together as well. But if it's one that's not healthy, is it worth the risk?
Coaches do use themes. When I was lead psych for England Rugby and worked alongside Eddie Jones, he likes to use themes. The challenge with themes is a lot of players don't resonate with the theme that you're throwing at them, because everybody sees the world differently, and things mean different things for different people.
Of course, you're not Jurgen Klopp. Of course, you're not working with Liverpool currently, or maybe you are, but I don't know. But what would be, just to kind of conclude and summarize, if you're a part of that team and squad, knowing what Liverpool have gone through last season, what would be the broad strokes of the process that you would kind of look to employ to get Liverpool back to where they want to be?
If I was Jurgen Klopp, I would be having as many conversations as I possibly could. And that's not to suggest that I wouldn't set the tone myself with my coaching staff, which I think is important for player certainty. But I would be striving to have as many conversations to find the most appropriate and efficient motivational pattern for each individual player. Having conversations around if-then practices. If this happens, then we will do this. If we lose the first couple of games, then we will do this. If we find ourselves behind Manchester City, then we have to do that. I would be using this time of year to have conversations to not just find efficient motivational patterns, but also the best high-performing mindsets for each individual. I would be striving to have those more small group conversations to create what we call in psychology shared mental models around the game plan and around mindset. I would want my back four really knowing each other as well as possible around mindset. I'd want the back four knowing the midfield as deeply as possible. I'd be trying to create as much certainty as possible. I'm saying this because there's never enough conversation at these clubs. Train, have lunch, go home, not enough conversation. The psychosocial, the biopsychosocial side is really the most important side because these players are technically good anyway. Can they get a bit better? They probably can. Tactically, well, biopsychosocial drives tactics because you want players to be able to learn the tactics, and then for them to be able to execute the tactics becomes a psychosocial thing anyway. It becomes a psychological process, an ability to play under pressure, an ability to learn and then go and execute the tactical side. I think the overarching thing would be a focus on us, to be honest. It's about us. Cliche. I haven't thrown one in yet, taking each game as it comes. But what does that actually mean? Unpack that. And when you unpack that, that's all the things I've said. The individual one-to-ones, the deliberate practice, how do we learn the tactics on Thursday so that players have the best chance to go execute on a Saturday? Not that any teams ever play consistently on a Saturday anymore. It's that shared mental model around the group mentality. It's that teamship. It's the relation. It's the conversation to drive relationship. It's about us. I'm less inclined to say, Manchester City. What are we going to do to beat them? What are they doing? How are we get? I'm less inclined to go last season. If we're going to focus on last season, what went well last season? What did we do really well that we've got to repeat? I want to hold an appreciative inquiry there. I don't want us to bemoan too much about what went wrong. So I guess I'm going to be a real psychologist here, and I'm going to say I want to direct our environment towards a healthy and safe environment that gives us the best chance to win. Because I think in the mid to long term, you've said this is an aging side and maybe we've got to go and do it now, that the cycle is going to end. I would still suggest that what we don't want to do is damage the culture and damage the environment in the mid to long term by going off on a frenzy of maladaptive, fearful, anxious, angry emotion. I think we want players who are going to continue to love what they're doing, express themselves, love playing together, working together, teaming, great coach-athlete relationships, great peer-to-peer relationships. We go again. Can we do it? It's about us. I think that's important because then if we don't do it, I get cycles. I get it's an older team. I get that. But you never know. And I think when you do it in a healthy, adaptive, safer way, because you can never be completely safer way, you give yourself a better chance to go again the following season and the following season. Mm. That's what I'd say.
That's interesting. Because, I think that's something I didn't truly focus on, and maybe the power of it all is that you can control us. Whereas there will be, and trust me, any sport, but certainly Premier League football teams at the top end, you will get people prodding and poking at you. And as soon as a game is lost or drawn, there will be all of that. So there has to be that calm as much as that focused aggression to succeed for a Liverpool team that has done brilliantly. And I think you're right. It's interesting. It's so easy to go, we'll change everything. Bring him on. We're not winning. Bring him on. Like, it doesn't. Sometimes you got to stick with what has been a very successful squad and team over the last few years. Absolutely fascinating stuff from Dan Abrahams. Dan, thank you so much. Me and Dan actually talk about Leeds United, so there'll be a video on the channel very soon talking about Leeds United and that second season syndrome. So keep an eye out for that. If you're still watching and you've enjoyed the video, please do consider liking and subscribing to the channel. We're trying to march our way to 150, and you can play your part in that and be a part of this community of this channel. So get involved. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.